Shrey. Thank you for taking some time out for this interview. Before we begin with the actual process, why don't you just walk me through your background and what got you interested in this product?
Sure. So I'm currently a graduate from BITS Pilani. I'm in my final year, and I'll be graduating very soon. So a little bit about me would actually I would like to highlight a few internships that I've done in the past. So in my first year itself, I was very interested in solving real life problems through a data centric approach, which actually got me very interested in data science. And that's when I landed an internship at Zomato, where my major task and my day-to-day goals included creating a recommendation engine that was able to recommend um, restaurants and also similar users. So we used multiple algorithms like word to vec embeddings and certain metrics that could really affect a particular recommendation engine. And ultimately, I think there was an increase of 5% in the click-through rate, which happened as an outcome of the project that I was working on. Apart from that, I've also won multiple competitions that are related to product management. One of them includes a product case study that happened at IIM Ahmedabad, wherein we were a team of 4 members, and it was a case study wherein we also had to do a product teardown of the different products that they had on their palette. And apart from that, I think majorly from my sophomore year itself, I've been a keen observer of how certain platforms function, how certain products function, and I've had a very curious mindset as to just solve basic problems and also try to find simplistic solutions that really could solve pain points. And that's something that really made me delve deeper into the product management field. Apart from that, I also hold two position of responsibilities that have taught me how to manage stakeholders very well. One of them includes the coordinator of the sports fest at BITS Pilani, and the other includes the president of the public speaking club at BITS Pilani. So, wherein I was also the founder and the president. So these PORs also taught me how to manage team well, how to show leadership skills, which I think are essentially very important in a product management role also.
Yeah, thanks for the background.
Apa-
And I would say, yeah, it's
right.
a great thing that you scored an internship right in first year. I know how much people struggle, but looks like you
Right.
had a great experience in your first year itself.
Yes,
Uh,
definitely. And from my first year itself, I've been trying to work in as many projects as possible and as many internships as possible. Going forward, I've also interned at companies like Indian Oil, companies like Seekify, wherein both of them were product management roles, wherein I've again learned a lot and worked with cross-functional teams, which again has helped me exponentially grow and build up my skill sets.
that's great. Okay, so let's start with the process itself. What we
Mhm.
have in store for today is two small case studies.
Right.
Uh,
Okay.
the first one is the most obvious question that you would expect in a product interview. It's
Okay.
what is a product that you use on a day-to-day basis, and
Okay.
suggest three features that you
Right.
would implement in that product.
Got it.
Yeah.
Cool. So I think one of the favorite products that I use on a day-to-day basis is, I think, definitely WhatsApp. That's something that I think most of us use on a day-to-day basis. And considering WhatsApp, I mean, um, there are a lot of things that we could do. However, before I tackle this question, I would like to ask a few clarification questions so that we are both on the same page.
Sure.
So initially, if I were to suggest certain features to create WhatsApp and into a better platform, what are the goals that I should be focusing on? Are there any specific goals, or do you want me to assume a goal myself?
So I would like you to put yourself as the primary user. What are the most pressing
Right.
problems for you as a user,
Okay. Right.
and then also assume yourself to be in a position of power where you can influence some of the features.
Right.
So you have to.
Right.
So what I would expect is, of course, not just the three features, but also what are the problems
Mhm.
that these features are solving for you, and
Fair
how
enough.
would you go
Right.
about. Uh, so the next We'll come to this part later. There is a second part to this case study as well, but we'll come to it later.
Mhm. Sure, got it.
So
So,
to begin with, it's just
first of all,
you're the
right,
user, you're the
got it. Sure. So
yeah.
initially, I'll just like to state, why I love WhatsApp. I think WhatsApp is used by around 2 billion people across, I think, around 180 countries. The reason that I use WhatsApp is because it's simple, it's effective, and apart from that, it also helps me hold conversations with the near and dear because ultimately, most of the people are using WhatsApp. And having those conversations in one-to-one private meeting or in group settings is something that I find really interesting and simple in WhatsApp. Now, considering if I'm a product manager who is thinking about certain features, I think the major goal that I would have is user engagement. Even as a user, by user engagement, what I mean is that people having more number of conversations in WhatsApp. So whether it's the number of messages that you're sending on a daily basis, or it's your session time on WhatsApp, but ultimately user engagement is one of the primary goals that I would like to focus on. Um, Especially considering the number of alternatives that have come up in the recent times, like
So
Instagram,
to
Signal.
say, just
Right,
taking a step back,
sure,
before going to the one almost 2 billion users, I would like you to solve a problem
right,
for yourself. You have
sure,
already, yeah.
cool,
So the features will be very very
sure,
specific, uh,
sure.
yeah, to just you and your use cases.
Sure. So, great, definitely. So I'll maybe take a minute
Yeah,
to think about the entire structure, and
right.
then I'll lay it down for you.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Cool. So I'll define that what is the kind of TG that I belong to.
Yeah,
I would say that I belong to the Gen Z or the millennial target audience. I find a few differences between both, which is basically, let's say, age 13 to 30. And if I consider this target audience, ultimately keeping user engagement as my ultimate goal, there are certain pain points that I'll first highlight that this target audience faces. Then I'll also highlight the strengths and the weaknesses of WhatsApp as a platform. And post that, I'll also be talking about the features that could meet the unmet needs of people like me.
got
Does that sound good to you?
yeah, sure. You can go ahead with that.
Cool. Cool. So starting with the pain points, I think most of the people who fall under this target audience, they'll be facing the following pain points. First is I think people who belong to Gen Z or millennials, they have a habit of flooding messages in a particular group with too many short messages. Ultimately, the core topic might get lost to people who actually log into that particular conversation later, which is again a big pain point wherein I've often seen people asking for a TLDR or a summary of what all has happened. You'll often find people looking at 200 messages if they wake up in the morning, and very, very seldom people actually look at all the messages. The other pain point that I could think of is that often I think in the current generation that we live in, having a very ongoing process for feedback is really important. Wherein I think WhatsApp currently has no ability to gather feedback from friends, from family. You are majorly having conversations without, and even if you're having conversations with your colleagues, ultimately there's no process to have feedback. The third pain point is that currently with apps like Hike, with apps like Snapchat, there are a lot of alternatives, and ultimately WhatsApp doesn't really allow you to play any inbuilt games. Like platforms like Hike have inbuilt games embedded into their engagement platform, which again is a pain point for me because I cannot really play any game on WhatsApp. The fourth point that I feel is a pain point again is that WhatsApp has a video sharing limitation, which is just 16 MB. Now, as a Gen Z or a millennial, I would often want to share videos that are of greater size, and especially in this era where video first is especially being highlighted. So again, that's a big pain point for me. And finally, I would say that currently, I don't think WhatsApp has the feature of in-app browsing. Like for example, you'll often notice Facebook or Instagram whenever you open links on these platforms, there is in-app browsing that's present there. So you don't have to
Right.
really go to another browser. So these are
Mhm.
few of the pain points that I could think of. And
Mhm.
apart from that, I've also noted down few of the strengths that WhatsApp has as a platform. I'll basically be leveraging these strengths to cover the pain points, and then come to the features that we could really implement. Few of the major strengths that I feel WhatsApp has is definitely popularity. As I mentioned in the initial sentences itself, it's basically popularity and 2 billion people. Um, the second is that the onboarding process of WhatsApp is pretty smooth. Having your phone OTP, I mean, just an OTP is definitely pretty smooth. You don't need to really enter your email ID or your LinkedIn profile or anything else. The third strength is, I would say, encryption. The encryption, wherein end-to-end encryption is pretty strong in WhatsApp. And finally, some other strengths would include that the group video calling feature and WhatsApp for business. And also a major highlight would be that it's owned by Facebook. So ultimately, there's a lot of data that WhatsApp has in terms of the attributes of a particular user.
So
On
that
the
can
same
also be
lines,
on by a lot of people. But yeah.
yes, definitely, yeah. But on the same lines, I would also like to highlight a few weaknesses, which again, would coincide with the pain points. First is that there's lack of innovation. As I mentioned, inbuilt games could be one of the major pain points. Then the other weakness is that, as you mentioned, private info can be leaked as well. There is lack of privacy because there's so much of data ultimately. And finally, Gen Z features and document size are two of the major weaknesses, which I've already highlighted in the pain points that I, as a TG member, would feel. So these are some of the basic things that I feel I should be taking into account before I think about the features that could be implemented. If you'd like to add on something to that, do let me know.
Yeah, of course. Like a lot of points that you said are completely valid and on point. Like
Right,
uh, WhatsApp, it is one of the things that you mentioned was lack of TLDR. I face it
right,
on the everyday basis
haha,
where I have to
right,
mute so many of my groups just because there are 200 million messages. Almost everyone we
right,
know has their family groups on mute.
right,
So that's the thing. But yeah, at the same time, some of the other things are I might have different opinion. I'm slightly on the other side of spectrum when it comes to a millennial, or I don't really relate to a Gen Z, where it's only now very recently that I'm
got it,
seeing or observing how users are interacting. The chattiness of the users is significantly higher in the Gen Z era, like
Mhm.
where basically people who are in the
Right,
18 to 23, 22 age group. But yeah, so a
right,
lot of valid
got
points.
it.
But to take this ahead, how would you distill whatever you said? Like there was a lot of information there, but how will you distill it into, say, top three features? And which also brings me to the second part of my of this case study, which is how will you go about even prioritizing? So because the prioritization comes right away, you have to first select top three, and within these top three, if you have to build them one by one, how will you sequence them?
Sure. So I think what I'll be now doing is I'll be thinking about around 6 to 7 features that could be possible to really tackle these pain points, considering
Right.
the strengths and the weaknesses in focus. And once I have all the features with me, I'll also be prioritizing them on the basis of majorly three parameters. The reach that it has, because we are focusing on user engagement, the impact that it can create, and
Right.
finally the complexity that it would have in terms of implementation. So these are three of the parameters that I'll be considering to prioritize that which of the features should I definitely recommend as my top three.
Got it.
Can I take a minute to again think about these features and I'll get back to you?
Absolutely.
Sure, thank you. Great. So I think I have my features ready. So
Right.
starting with the first one, I would like to highlight that what we could do at WhatsApp is we could implement inline replies. So what that would mean is that if there is a particular message that's on the group, all the other users could react on that message by just pressing that particular message for a longer time, and ultimately a few very commonly used emojis could pop up and they could send their inline replies. Now, this is very similar to what you might have seen on Instagram DMs. But now this is something that could also really get down the number of messages that come on a daily basis, because almost everyone in a group would have a certain reaction to a meme or a joke, and ultimately people do
Right.
want to express. The second
Yeah.
feature that I would again come up with is a subpart of the first, which is short inline replies. This again would be corresponding to the emojis. So just like you are replying inlines with emojis, you could also maybe say a few words, let's say have a limit of 3 words or 4 words, which doesn't really pop up as a separate message, rather just as an inline reply. Coming to
Okay.
the second major feature that I could think of is threaded messaging. So I'm not sure whether you've ever experienced Slack or not, but then currently WhatsApp has a feature wherein you can reply to a particular message, but you cannot really create threads. However, that is something that really takes out the entire attention to irrelevant topics, and you sometimes tend to forget what the entire conversation was all about. So,
Right.
on a side note, people should be able to have threaded messaging so that whenever there is a bunch of people talking, if there is a certain topic that they would want to deviate to, then that's possible. The third major feature that I could think of is conducting polls. Now, as I mentioned, a major pain point is also gathering feedback. So, conducting polls is in the current era really important for you to understand what do people think about you, or any circumstance possible. So, conducting polls will really help in doing that. This is also something that drives people to other platforms, and this will also help in overall user engagement, because you're giving feedback and you're conducting polls in a much better fashion if you're on WhatsApp, because there are a lot of people on WhatsApp and not on other platforms. And post
Right.
that, there are two other features that I could think of. First is directly dealing with one of the pain points by increasing the video limit. As I mentioned, that we do face this particular issue that it's limited to 16 MB, and hence increasing it would definitely drive more people to share, videos or podcasts, or even uh, a lot of other stuff that are possible, and opens some really good opportunities for people. And
Right.
finally, I would like to say that viewing a link within the app, as I mentioned, in-app browsing is something that could, again, drive engagement in a much better fashion, because you're still using the platform. And it's generally seen that if you're exiting the platform to open a browser, then the chances of you coming back to WhatsApp as a platform becomes really less. However, if you're still on the platform and using their browser,
Right.
you are bound to come back.
Right.
So these are some of the features that I could think of. And majorly, I have also prioritized them according to the parameters that I had mentioned early on. So
Right.
the first inline replies, how I would score them is on the basis of reach. I would give it 9 points. I would score it on the basis of impact and complexity as 8 and 3 respectively, because I think that it is fairly tough to execute this particular inline replies. And the second feature that I mentioned was threaded messaging. Um, for this particular feature, I feel that 7, 7, 9 are the respective points that I would like to give it. And majorly the other two features as well, I feel conducting polls, or be it increasing video limit. Um, if I calculate a total score that I could come up with on the basis of all the three functions, then the inlines would score around 20, the threaded messaging would score around 23, the polls would score around 22, and the increasing video limit feature would score around 22 again. And finally, viewing a link within the app would score around 21. So I've calculated the score out of 10 for every parameter, for all the three parameters out of 30. And now, on the basis of these scores, it's pretty simple to prioritize the entire list and recommend which are the different features that I would like to come up with. The first one is definitely threaded messaging. This again deals with the major pain point that Gen Z has, which is the TLDR problem. The second feature is conducting polls. That is again dealing with the feedback mechanism. and would definitely drive more amount of user engagement. And the third limitation that I would like to remove through a feature is by increasing the video limit. This is, I think, easier to implement. However, it's a cost ultimately. But again, it has a way higher impact and reach. So I would definitely recommend these three features as the features that I would like to implement on WhatsApp.
I would say that the third feature has a significant cost. But again, given WhatsApp is a free service and how much data you are uploading, uh,
Right,
but again, I will not go into the nitty gritties or the complexities of cost versus benefit debate right now. Uh,
right,
but yeah, overall, it's a great framework that you have used. That you have for every feature you have allocated at certain points, be it complexity or
right.
utility, and so I would respect your feature priority at least to begin with.
Great. Thank you so much.